How's it going, guys? This is Ryo Murata, photographer based in Tokyo. In this video, I'd like to talk about how to shoot long exposure night photography in general. Keep note and full disclaimer. I have to say this in first because in my previous video, I shot during the nighttime at a Love Hotel district, and this was actually my first time shooting night long exposure type of photography. And someone after that said that they would love to see me like talk about night photography in general and how I shoot my way. And before going into details, I realized I had two options: make small short like videos but lying around on my channel. And I realized that like for my viewers, I mean, you guys don't want to like go on searching my whole channel to see that specific area, specific components of making long exposure photography. So I thought, like, why not like talk about everything in this video part by part, and then it's going to be a super long video, but like I will leave time links for you guys to like jump over to the specific components that you guys are interested in, whether or not if it's exposure or whether or not if it's about like equipments and stuff like that. So hopefully it will help you out in the long run. Oh, you guys might be asking me, how is it possible for me to shoot really nice photos on my first try at night, long exposure? And you have to like keep in mind that I work as a full-time photographer in the e-commerce space. I basically shoot for apparel, like stuff, men's like apparel stuff online, and I'm used to shooting with digital. And digital, you can basically like mess up so many times, right? Because you can basically view the photo that you shot on the back of the screen of your camera or on the monitor. And long exposure is no doubt the easiest thing to do on a digital camera. You set it on a tripod, you set the timer, the setting, and you just press the shutter and you're done, kind of. And if it's too dark, you can basically fix on that spot. But the main difference between shooting with digital and shooting with film at night is A, you're limited to the amount of shots that you can take with your camera, and B, you do not know the results until you have it processed in a lab or by yourself, and then after that you have to scan it to see the final results, which is time consuming. And C, you have to like take into account reciprocity, which is reciprocity failure, and also exposure, which is like really critical when shooting nighttime photography in general. Okay, so before I begin, let's talk about the basics. Equipments. In order to shoot long exposures at night with a film camera, you need 5 things. A 35mm film camera that has a cable release insert. This is important, guys. And number 2, you need a cable release. And 3, you need a sturdy tripod with a stable head. I would highly prefer a gear head as the shooting head, and a light meter, which comes in number 4, and number 5 is a film stock of your choice. 35mm film camera, not like a toy camera, but a dedicated camera that has a cable release mount on that shutter area is a must when doing nighttime photography. Like the Nikon F3 that I mostly use for my 35mm work, there's basically a hole or a sort of like an indentation on the shutter where you basically screw on your cable release into the camera. And in most cases, what we call the cable release for film photography in general are all standardized. So no matter what kind of cable you get, it will work 100% of the time. However, there is a however. There are specific like cable releases that are meant for TLRs, if I'm right, Rolei cords and Minotaur cords. Those types of camera use a smaller, thinner, I guess, cable release. So be careful with that. But in most cases, the one you see on Amazon and all those what we call photography type of website sell the standardized version, so that is a must when doing nighttime photography. Nothing much to say about cable releases. They are simple structures where you just basically press on the shutter and the metal tip basically will push the internal mechanism within the 35mm film camera and fires away the shutter. This is basically the most efficient and less what we call method, the most efficient way of like firing the shutter, because you're not physically touching the shutter, and you're basically allowing something mechanical to like press the shutter within the camera, so there's not much of a vibration going on. So that's essential equipment. There are other ways of firing the shutter, and generally, if you're in a pinch, the Nikon F3 in general has a timer functions, and some SLRs, especially the flagship ones, tend to have a timer function, but I would highly stray away from using the timer function due to a couple of reasons. One is that you can only select the shutter speed on the dial of your like film camera. So the Nikon F3, if I last checked, if I'm right, I think it was like 4 seconds or 8 seconds, somewhere along that, and you can't go beyond that. So if you're, in most cases when you're doing long exposures, there are times where you want to like shoot out like 15 seconds, 30 seconds, you know, super long extended period of times. You can't do that on a timer setting. So that's why you have a cable release. You can basically choose whatever exposure you want by pressing the shutter or pressing the cable release. And also, this is another thing that I realized when shooting with a camera and also not shooting with the timer function, is that the timer function, basically when you press on the shutter, the basically blinks a couple of times and then takes a shutter. But the cons of that is that if you have it on a tripod and when you try to turn on the, you know, what you call the timer on and press the shutter, it fires like 3-4 seconds later, right? But there are those scenarios where a random person on a bicycle might pass by and can ruin your shot. So that's why if you physically press the shutter using a cable release, it's much more efficient, and you will be much more successful than using up the timer function. So that's like one of the things to point out of like owning a cable release when doing nighttime photography. So for nighttime photography, another key equipment is tripod, and this is going to be a long part actually. To sum up my life experience with like tripods, there are 4 key aspects of when like choosing the right tripod, which is size, weight, material, and the height / sections. The size relatively will vary depending on your typical like height, and typically a great like tripod is when all the legs are extended and without the center column not going up but being flat. That is basically where your eyesight would be, and I would not highly advise people to like shoot with the center column extended, due to the fact that the more higher you go, the more unstable it would be. So I would highly suggest you guys to like shoot on the flat, what do you call it, when it's not extended at all, because that's basically the most stable area to like shoot long exposures. And so another key components for the tripod is the weight. Weight is important due to the fact that a heavier tripod would also mean a more stable tripod. The toss-up here is the price versus weight actually, and a heavier tripod, like I said, is much more stable, but you have to keep in mind that if you're traveling often, like a heavier tripod is not the way to go. Actually, a lighter tripod is a way to go. So you basically have to like sacrifice one for the other. A lighter tripod is much more expensive, while it might be less stable in most cases. And the key fact here is that lightness is not like necessary. And what I'm trying to say like right now is that like if you have a super lightweight like tripod and you have it on a location, a really like windy location, it could topple over and ruin your camera. But there are those moments where those types of tripods that are very lightweight, carbon tripods such as Gitzo in particular, have these sort of like screw mounts where you attach to the bottom of the center column, and you can basically put a bag or a weight on top of there, not on top, but you can basically hang it over your tripod to add additional weight and stabilities. But this is like something that's reserved for more expensive tripods. So also keep note that this weight aspects lead to what kind of material that like tripod uses, since the key components of making a tripod is either some kind of metal components or some kind of like carbon fiber component. And by metal, I mean depending on the manufacturer, they either have some kind of aluminum tripod, budget-friendly one, or some kind of like a manganese hybrid type of like metal like tripod like Manfrotto, and etc etc. And typically heavier, yet due to the metal properties, they are rugged and built like tanks. But carbon fiber, on the other hand, they are much lighter and more expensive, and they are prone to durability issues from side pressures and stuff like that. And not all carbon fiber tripods are like built the same, especially the Amazon basic ones versus the Gitzo ones. Probably if you're in the field, you know what I'm talking about. A cheap like what carbon fiber tripod would get damaged easily from side pressures, because carbon fiber tripods tends to be efficient in stabilizing things from the top, but not that durable from side pressures and stuff like that. They could get cracks and stuff. While like the more expensive like tripods such as Gitzos and the one that I have, the Leo Photo ones, which have some kind of like hybrid, I don't know what do you call it. It's like a customized like braiding method that they came up with. Depending on how you braid the carbon fiber, it can withstand weight from above and from the side, making it a really durable, like what you call tripod. So processing methods depend. So I might digress a little bit, but about tripods. But another important thing to look for when you're looking for a tripod to do night photography is that maximum payload. Personal experience that manufacturers on their websites, tripod manufacturers, have some kind of like maximum payload for their like tripods, the entire ranges, and I would say that their like website, their spec sheets is complete BS due to the fact that depending on what kind of camera lens combo you use, it could get really unstable, honestly. And although the manufacturer says like 3 kilograms maximum payload, it's more like half that, like 1.5 kilograms or maybe 1.2 kilograms depending on your camera lens combination. And depending on the center of gravity of your camera and lens combination, it could topple over. So it's not great to look at that, spec sheet. It's more like, keep in mind, it's more like half that. So in my case, I think my camera manufacturer says like 5 to 8 kilograms, somewhere along that. But from my experience, the most heaviest camera that I use, a GW690, is like 1.3 or 1.4 kilograms. So, and it's sufficient enough in my case. So it's one thing to like mention in my videos. Hopefully I covered everything about tripods. Oh wait, there's sections. I'm such an idiot. So sections are basically an acronym for how many like sections there are on a tripod. And this is another toss-up between that people have, and keep in mind that the more sections you have, the more compact the tripod will be. But this is where it gets really nasty, because people tend to think that the more sections there are, it's more travel friendly and it's much more lighter, and you can basically take it, you could take it anywhere you want. But the problem with that is the more sections you have, the less stable it would become, due to the fact that because there's like more sections within the tripod, what happens is that the tip of the tripod becomes, the diameter that I'm talking about, gets really thin. If there's like 5 sections or maybe 4 sections depending on the tripod, and the thinner it gets, it becomes less stable. And from my experience, if it goes to a certain point, you will get a lot of shake going on. Although the what you call the thickest area of the tripod is really thick, the tip is like really thin. So that's like somewhere to like keep in mind. And when you go to a local like camera stores, a dedicated camera stores such as Yodobashi Camera in Japan, especially in Tokyo, they actually at the what you call tripod sections, they actually tell you the tip diameter. And this is something that a lot of people do not know, but it's an important factor to keep in mind. They actually tell you the tip diameter of each tripod that they're being sold, especially the more expensive ones, actually, like Gitzos, Manfrottos, and also Leo Photo in general. And from my personal biased experience, the optimum like diameter for shooting nighttime photography, I might be right or wrong, but hopefully I'm right. But if you're like shooting with 35mm film cameras, it would be roughly 22mm in diameter to roughly 25mm. That's like the niche, if I'm right. Or if it's like thicker than that, it's going to be really stable actually. And if you're like shooting with a medium format camera, I would highly suggest a tripod's tip diameter to be 28mm or more than that. So maybe like 32mm, that's like a really thick tripod, and a 35mm tripod, which is like a really expensive one actually. So that's like my personal experience and important factor to keep in mind. And going back onto topic, the tripod that I currently use, the Leofoto Mr. Q284C, which is probably one of the easiest, Leofoto's actually easiest tripod manufacturer to identify what their tripod is, because 284 means it's a 28mm 4-section tripod, C is carbon, and you're done. Unlike Gitzo, where it's like 3,524 or something, which kind of screws a lot of photographers out there. So they're like thinking, what the heck is 3,500? Oh, it's a system 3, but I do not know the remaining 3 digits. I mean, can't they like make it like really like, you know, easy to understand for the consumers? So that's like one of the things that some manufacturers try to differentiate from other manufacturers by indicating what the diameter is on their tripod for people to understand, and the sections. So, and C is carbon for the composites and stuff like that. AB is aluminum, you know. A stable head, a head aka as known as the top part of the tripod area, or I don't know what you guys would call it, but it's basically the thing where you mount your camera onto the tripod. And as of 2021, there's basically 3 types of what he calls head for the tripod, which is a ball head, a gear head, and a 3-way head. To sum it up in short, a ball head is basically the easiest one to use. You've probably seen it everywhere, you know. There's basically 1 to 3 knobs, one for locking the pan and another one for locking the what you call the angle, and another one is basically a friction, something that adjusts the how much pressure you need to like tilt the camera and lock it into place kind of. And there's not much to talk about ball heads in general, but it's basically the great thing about ball heads are they are lightweight and easy to carry around, great for like travel photography and stuff like that. But the cons of having a ball head is that once you have it locked into place and you want to make incremental adjustments, it's almost impossible to do incremental adjustments, because due to the fact of the nature of ball heads, that because when you unlock it and try to shift the axle up, there's that tendency that it's gonna shift to the right or left, and you basically had to fix that again, and you can't do those precise incremental movements with a ball head. It's really impossible, and it pisses me off. So that's like one of the reasons why I never use a ball head. The only reason or scenarios that I use ball heads is in this case where I basically clamp my camera onto a tripod to shoot myself, and I need that ease and what I call work way to sort of like mount my camera onto a tripod in a fast like manner. And if there's like some kind of like angle shift going on, I can basically like fix it, and I don't need that much of a precise movements, especially when shooting this video in particular. So depending on how you shoot, it would differ, but a ball head in my case, I never use them outside due to the fact that I would rather want something precise. And a 3-way basically prevents that, and there's basically like 3 handles sticking out, and each like basically handle has designated like what I call movements, where one basically moves only up and another one moves sideways and another one just moves the pan axle. And a 3-way basically fixes the problems that a ball head has, which is you can do really incremental movements, but not super incremental movements, but you can basically execute those movements much more efficiently, and it's used widely among a lot of people, wildlife, nature, and all sorts of people. In my case, I never use ball heads. I used to use ball heads, not ball heads, but why did I say ball heads? I previously used like 3-ways because they were the cheapest actually, and I previously used Manfrotto tripods and they came with 3-way, which was alright. And up until the point where I found out about gear heads, and I just switched over in an instant actually. And the great thing about the 3-ways is that, like I said, you can basically do efficient movements. But on the other hand, compared to ball heads, they are really bulky and really hard to travel around in some cases, depending on what kind of type you have. Manfrottos have, I think they recently released a version where you can basically make it a little bit much more compact to travel with. So innovation is great in some cases. Goes to the last but not least, the gear head, which I use 100% of the time actually. And as the name suggests, on each basically a gear in each of those knobs, and basically what happens is that when you twist the part of the gears, it makes a super incremental movements. And by this method, this is the most efficient way of executing the precise composition that you want. And this is actually used widely among lots of product photographers, still life photographers, and also architectural type of photography, which require precise, because you want your lines to be straight in the middle. And if you're like shooting buildings and stuff like that, you want all your lines to be perfectly straight up. I mean, you could fix it in post, but that means that you have to crop the image. So if you want the best of the world, I would highly suggest a gear head, because if you can like fit everything within that frame, you don't have to crop the photo within post and lose resolution along the way. So it's one of the reasons why I use a gear head. And also because in my previous like video where I shot the Love Hotel district, that's basically an architectural type of stuff. So I just wanted all my like basically photos to look straight, and it doesn't look right when it doesn't look straight, you know? And it's like my characteristics that if I could get it done within the camera, I don't have to mess around in post, you know, process and Photoshop and stuff like that. So, and basically I can basically like save a lot of time along the way if I could get it right in the camera, and that's what I try to do. So that's why I use a gear head. But the only downside with gear heads is that there's a lot of downsides. One is it's super slow and you need a lot of patience. And due to the fact that when you spin the knob, it only does incremental movements, so it takes a lot of effort and time, and you really have to be patient to get it right. But if you get it right, the reward is really rewarding in the end. And in addition to that, gear heads are probably the most heaviest type of head in the head of what I've mentioned before. It's much more heavier than a ball head or a 3-way head, and it's like heavy to carry around actually. So it's not a travel friendly like companion, but if there's like something you really want to shoot, a gear head is highly preferred, especially in like long exposures and stuff like that. When shooting long exposures, like you want it to look perfectly right. And I would highly advise people to get a gear head instead of the ball head or 3-way head, because those in my mind are really stressful in my opinion. So that's basically one of the reasons why I would choose a gear head over the other two. The light meter and how I meter. So basically I currently use the Sekonic light meter L308S, which a lot of people actually own, and probably it's the most used light meter period. You just insert the ISO aperture and tells you the shutter speed, or on the other hand, it basically tells you the specific like value of what you are looking for. And And also, FYI, Sekonic has a new version, which is a L308X, which is what I'm actually trying to get my hands on. And I'm just waiting for someone to like sell it used actually. And I'm gonna digress a little bit, but 308X would be my recommendation. Dude, it is a little bit expensive, but you get an LCD screen that actually glows in the dark, or not glows in the dark. It basically has a sort of like a what you call it. It's like an LCD panel that's like a smartphone. It lights up, but the 308S that I currently use does not light up. So I had a lot of issues checking the exposure values because it's like really dark. So that's like something to mention in my video. And I think it's like worth it if you're like shooting a lot of nighttime photography, or if you're like shooting near when the sun is like going down. The 308X is probably the best like light meter to have at your disposal. Light metering. How should I start this? So this is going to be my personal experience. There are no right or wrong answers, but the really important thing that I had to mention about metering is that when you meter during the day and night, it's completely different. In my case, during the day, let's say a really bright sunny day, I always fix my shutter speed to 1/125 of a second, ISO to the designated ISO that you're shooting at. If I'm shooting like Portra 400, in most cases I will shoot at ISO 200, and I basically look at the aperture value. And in most cases, if it's a sunny day, it's either going to be like f8 or f11, and if it's like a really bright day, it would be like f16. And in those cases, if the meter says f16, I would basically, instead of shooting at f16, I would shoot at f11, because I do not want to go beyond f16, because there's something called diffraction that occurs when you basically close down the aperture to f16, f22, f32, if it's possible on a 35mm film camera. What happens is you lose resolution along the way. So I don't want that to happen. And the most sharpest area would be f8 or f11. So instead, I basically bump up the shutter to 1/250th of a second to sort of compensate that sort of like brightness. So nighttime, however, does not apply from the daytime scenario, and it's important to keep in mind that in order to take a photo, we need to think about the ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. During nighttime, we are looking for the shutter speed, how long we want our like shutters to be open to have enough light to hit the film emulsion to get the proper exposure. And in most cases, we know that the ISO is fixed, and hopefully your aperture is also fixed. You guys probably have in mind like what your aperture would be. Would you want your photo to be everything in focus, or do you want a specific area to be out of focus, and etc, etc. So we're looking for the shutter speed right here. So nighttime shutter speed is important, daytime more like the aperture is like more important. So going back onto topic, and when shooting nighttime photography, in my case, from my only one time experience shooting at night, I think there's basically two scenarios that happen. A is 90, and this applies to probably everyone, 90% of the time you're shooting an area where the light is constant. And what I mean is, in most cases when you're shooting nighttime photography, there's going to be some kind of light post, a building, or some kind of skyscraper, or any kind of like object emitting light, and that light output is constant, meaning that throughout the night, that the light output, because it's like constant, we know we can understand how much light is emitting from those objects using our light meters. But there are those cases when the light is not constant, and last time when I shot during Love Hotel, you guys probably saw that video, light output is not constant at all. It's more like variable, and like this scenario right here, depending on and if you know a lot about light, that's what photography is, like understanding the light. Depending on the spectrum of the light, the output changes dramatically. A white LED will emit more light output than a white called a red LED, dark red, dark blues. And this is like gets really hard in my opinion from my experience shooting last time. And I have to say that compared to like shooting an area where it's like the light output is constant, in my case, when I shoot these variable areas, variable light output type of areas, I take a lot of metering using my Sekonic light meter. I take like 5, 6, 7, 8 meters and basically average them out. And by doing that, I can basically sort of like get the gist of like what the spectrum is throughout the range. And at the same time, when I'm at these locations where it's like really the light output is different, I basically stay there like 2 times longer than compared to being at a location where the light output is, constant, due to the fact that it's harder to interpret the, the quality of that light. And it's like really hard to like manage all those information in one go. So it takes a lot of processing time within my head. And at the same time, because I'm doing a lot of calculations in my head of like what the exposure would look like, it just takes a lot of time. And it's important to like stay at that location for an extended period of time if you do not understand what you're doing. And it's like you're really worse off if you just take just one photo and just walk away. Instead, the great thing about shooting with 35mm is that you have lots of like shots that you can do variable like settings. Like you can basically make it 1 stop, 2 stop, 3 stops brighter if your exposure value from what you saw on the light meter is off. So that's like something to like mention. And like I said, I take a lot of meterings and basically face the light meter at my subject exact same angle as where the camera is being placed. And I basically do like 5 readings or maybe more depending on the circumstance, the area and the scene and stuff like that. And along with that, what I do is I also sort of like tilt my light meter. Where's my light meter? Where's my light meter? I got my light meter. So basically I have my light meter. If the camera's, I'll use this like action camera right here. Okay, the camera is being like on tripod like here. I would basically face the light meter exact same angle as the camera and look at the readings. Keep doing this like 5 times and put all those numbers in your head and just average that number out. And along with that, when you average that number, at the same time, you basically tilt the light meter like 45-degree angle down at the what you call the ground surface, because due to the fact that this is like where it gets a little bit iffy for some people, that what's important is also the subject, but you have to keep in mind the whole frame of what you're shooting, and the ground is also within that frame. And depending on the circumstance, the ground will, depending on how you will shoot it, if you shoot it a little bit underexposed, the ground's gonna look totally black. So you have to keep in mind how black would that surface, that area would be along with the sky if you're interested in the sky and stuff like that. But I never take the readings of the sky. What I look at is the ground, and it's more like 1 or 2 stops underexposed or something like that. And if I know the values of what the ground would be, I could like pre-visualize what the image will look like. Okay, so this black area, this ground area is like what, 1 stop underexposed. So I can basically barely would see it when I scan the the film negatives. So it's like one of the things that I do when I shoot with a light meter. And keep in mind that some people never take a reading of the ground, some people do, and with that, some people take the reading of the sky at the same time because they prefer the sky to be much more important than the ground area. People have their own like techniques of like shooting long exposures with a light meter. So it's like there's no right or wrong answers. Like things that a lot of people talk about, which is really true, is that it's like really important to keep in mind that film performs really well overexposed during the day and at night. And I have to say this with confidence because due to the fact that I actually came from the digital side, and digital is what I do as my main like job. I work as a digital photographer, and it's the complete opposite of shooting digital. And what I mean is digital like files, JPEGs and stuff like that, you can retrieve the shadow details on a digital file, but you cannot retrieve the highlights, blown out highlights. It's like really impossible to retrieve like blown out highlights. Video is like explicit. It's like you can't retrieve like in like a raw format, video format, but like photography, digital, it's like really impossible to retrieve the highlights, blown out highlights, but you can retrieve it, the what we call shadows. But film photography is the complete opposite. It's like similar to like videography and cinematography actually. You can retrieve the blown out highlights in film photography because it's coming from cinema when I just realized, but it's basically the same concepts as like videography and cinematography. You can retrieve the blown out highlights, but it's hard to retrieve the like black shadows, and even if you do, it looks really muddy, dark, and it doesn't look really great in my eyes to a lot of people, and a lot of people say that, and it took a lot of time for me to like sink in because I'm not used to shoot like videos and film when I started out. And it's like really important to have your film when you like measure the value with your light meter that it's like 1 or maybe 2 stops overexposed, and if it's like really blown out, you can basically retrieve it in post. And but at the same time, because the shadow area, like the ground, is a little bit brighter, you can dodge and burn in post, make it darker and stuff like that. So it's like one of the things I forgot to like mention, which is like really important. So how I would implement this to my Sekonic like meter is that I would like to have every hassle out of my way. So I will select first 800 on my Sekonic light meter, and at the same time the aperture is like fixed, mostly like f8 or maybe f11 depending on what I'm looking for, what kind of look I'm looking for, locked into place. And like I said, we are looking for the shutter speed in general. So the reading, let's say, is f8 ISO 800, and the shutter speed says 1 second. And like I said, I always overexposed by 1 stop. So what's 1 stop above 1 second? That would be 2 seconds. So basically I would shoot at 2 seconds instead of 1 second, and then I will get a photo that's 1 stop overexposed. So this gets a little bit complicated when you change your film stock to a lower speed ISO film, such as Ektar 100. Let's say I'm shooting at f8 at ISO 100 because Ektar is 100, and because Ektar 100 is 2 stops under compared to Cineso 800T, we basically have to compensate for that. So in order to get the same results, we have to like add 2 stops on top of 1 second. So that would become 1 second, 2 seconds, then 4 seconds. But this is where the but goes. Like I said, I always shoot 1 stop overexposed. So and on top of that, I need to add another another stop of, I need more light for my camera to capture and record that, image. So on top of 4 seconds, I need to go another stop. So that would be 8 seconds. So that's a long exposure for a lot of people. And that's why a lot of people who do night photography do not want to like shoot out with a low speed ISO, due to the fact that you basically have to hold the cable release for 8 seconds or maybe 15 seconds. And like I said, I'm shooting at f8. And what happens if you want to shoot at f11 is that you basically need to like shoot it for another stop. So like I said, 8 seconds, and on top of that you need to put another stop, so that's 15 seconds. So you basically had to hold your hand for like 15 seconds and then wait until 15 seconds pass away and you basically release the shutter cable. That's a daunting task for a lot of people. So that's why a lot of people want to shoot with a high speed ISO like film, so that they don't want to hold their hands up in the air for extended period of time. So that's like how I shoot actually. And if you do not have a light meter, there are apps like lightmeter.com or something, not lightmeter.com, but there's a free app if you search it up on iOS or maybe Android, Google Play Store. They have a free app where you can basically download and use your smartphone as a sort of like a light meter. But I do not use this. I use it as a backup due to the fact that I have to say that the application is flawed because depending on what kind of smartphone you use, each and every smartphone is built differently. An iPhone and my like what I call Xiaomi phone completely has different sensors, different lens combination. There's like different softwares and stuff like that, processing and stuff like that, that could screw over the valuation of the specific like area wingline metering. And a Sekonic meter is a standardized sort of like a meter, so it doesn't go bad at all. Actually, I never sent this off to maintenance at all, and I actually have a person who works at this company, and he works as a sort of like a salesperson, and he said that typically these things, unlike monitors where it needs to be calibrated, Sekonic light meters do not have to be calibrated like every year or so. I mean, these don't have to be calibrated for a couple of like decades, if I'm right. So that's like one of the great things about these like meters, honestly. So it's great to use like a dedicated like light meter that give you the precise results instead of some software that could go wrong, you know. So that's like somewhere I need to point out for you guys. So last but not least, we had to talk about the reciprocity failure. And it was interesting because when I shot with Cinestill 800T, I looked at the reciprocity failure, but they do not have a reciprocity data sheet. And at the same time, this is due to the fact that higher speed films, you do not have your like shutter open for extended period of time, so you really don't have to account for it. And what reciprocity failure is it does not exist in digital, but exists in film photography when doing long exposure. What it is basically the longer the shutter exposes the film emulsion for extended period of time, that film emulsion that's being constantly hit by light loses its sensitivity, and it loses sensitivity if you're doing like 15 seconds, 30 seconds, 1 minute like exposures. And in order to compensate, you basically had to add a couple of stops, 1/3 stops, or 1 stop, 2 stops, or maybe 3 stops, depending on the duration of your like exposure. So find these like reciprocity, what we call it, data sheets on the manufacturer's website. I'll stick one for the Kodak Portra series, and I failed math during high school and chemistry during high school, so I'm not good at reading graphs, but it would look like this basically, that if you're doing 1 second exposure, you don't have to compensate at all, but if you're doing 4 seconds exposures, you basically have to compensate by adding 1/3 of a stop. And if it's the exposure is like 8 seconds, you basically have to add another stop. And if you're doing 15 seconds, you need to add 1 1/3 of a stop. And what this does is it basically balances out the reciprocity failure, that because that, like I said, the light is constantly hitting the film emulsion, but it's losing sensitivity. So you basically have to add another stop so it could get more light onto the film and you'll get a perfect photo. So, and it's kind of interesting because when I shot with a Cinestill 800T, I did not do any reciprocity, what you call failure compensation, because it was an 800 ISO film. And in my case, my most, what I call, I'm guessing that the shutter speed for all my photos were less than 2 seconds, actually 1 to 2 seconds. It was rather bright in that area, so I did not have to do any like compensation. I never bothered. But if you're using like a Kodak Portra 400, you have to double that. So in most cases, at least, you will do like a 4 seconds exposure or maybe 8 seconds exposure. So you have to do some kind of compensation when shooting with Portra 400 series. Pro 400H, which was discontinued. Yes. So just overall procedure that we've covered everything with of how to shoot. You first install the film stock, then for the camera, take a shot until you go to 1 if you're using a Nikon camera. Install the camera onto a tripod head, and after it's secured, you try to compose the best angle, if depending on your preference, landscape or portrait orientation. If the location sucks, you can always go to a different location. And instead of like dismounting the camera and redoing the process from square one, you could basically carry the tripod and just run around and mess around, but don't do that. But if you're confident about the location, attach the cable release and then measure the what you call the exposure values using your like light meter. And once you dial those like numbers into your camera settings after the ISO, hopefully it's locked into place, recheck just to see if you never, like sometimes when you change the focusing of the camera lens, you could actually accidentally like change the aperture, so recheck that to see if it's in place. And and also I forgot to mention that you need to dial in the what do you call the dial to B, which stands for bulb mode, and attach the cable release along the way and press the shutter to the designated what you call shutter speed, 4 seconds or 8 seconds, and the shutter opens, and you calculate 4 seconds, 8 seconds using a timer on your phone, and you just basically release after 4 seconds or 8 seconds, and you're basically done. So that's basically everything that I wanted to talk about in this video, shooting about long exposures with a film camera. Obviously from here on out, the method of shooting will depend on that person, and each and every person has their own technique of like shooting. I only talked about the basics of how I shoot, and obviously there are more things that I wanted to talk about, but it would be like super long. So I basically tried to trim down the most important aspects when shooting long exposures and during the night. And hopefully I helped a lot of people. I mean, there's going to be a lot of people asking me a lot of questions, and I'm like happy to reply to those. And hopefully you guys like stick to the end of the video, hopefully. And if you have like any questions, feel free to like write them in the comments section below. I'm happy to reply. And yeah, thumbs up if you like this video, and we will see you next time. Peace.